Hi, my name's Suzanne Schaefer, and I'm the instructional designer at the Penn State York campus. And I'd like to share a few examples of how we integrated ELLI into a first-year college reading course. Penn State York is a commuter campus with about 100 full and part-time faculty. We have approximately 1,100 undergraduate students, and each year we admit close to 300 first-time, full-time students. We used ELLI in the context of a paired course design. So students taking a 3-credit college reading course also took a 3-credit general education science course, and they learned reading and study skills which they applied directly to the science course. But at the same time, we worked on building their lifelong learning skills using ELLI. So we set up our account with Vital Partnerships, and then students during the first week of classes took the 74-item online self-report, and they took it again during the last week of classes so we could compare their scores. So then students looked at their scores according to the 7 dimensions of learning power, which you can see on the screen now. Throughout the semester, we used this repeated cycle where students took their scores from ELLI, and then we went into a cycle of reflection, action planning, coaching, which could happen either through myself as the instructor or peer-to-peer, or also self-coaching. And our goal was to build a common language about lifelong learning. Our semesters are 15 weeks long, so since there are 7 dimensions, I decided to take 1 dimension every 2 weeks, and we'd work in 2-week repeated cycles. So in week 1, we would work with the new learning dimension to get an understanding of what it meant, and then we'd make connections between that dimension, their scores, and their personal lives, their lives outside of the classroom. Then in the second week of each cycle, we would take that same dimension and start to make connections to their academics. And this is an example from one of the resources provided by Vital Partnerships in their book that they call My Profile. So every student got a copy of this that gives an exploration and an explanation of each one of the learning dimensions. And so we usually started with that, giving them some background knowledge and understanding about each one of the learning dimensions. So in this first example from class, using the changing and learning dimension, we had students look at their ELLI scores and start to think initially about whether they matched how they viewed themselves in that area and whether they had a good understanding of that learning dimension. And then we had a guest speaker come in that was our campus career counselor to talk about some of their goals, career goals, personal goals, and had them work through a tool we call the My Plan tool that lets them identify possible careers and getting them to think about, after an initial experience of college, were they thinking about making any changes, or were they on track in terms of what they were studying in their larger career goals. And then we started our initial reflection and action planning around that idea of changing and learning. In the second week of the cycle, we really wanted to tie changing and learning back to their academics in a concrete way. So each time we did a new dimension, I really was trying to connect it to real questions or real incidences that had occurred during the class. So they had just completed their second exam for their science course and hadn't done as well as we all would have liked. And so it was really time to take a look more closely at what they were actually doing to prepare for exams. So we had already been doing a lot of work about how to prepare for exams, but my question was, were they really doing those strategies? And if not, were they willing to change at this point, seeing that their exam scores were not as good as what everyone had hoped? And so we'd spend some time debriefing what they were actually doing. I got them to do a meditation session and getting them to do a detailed description and journal format of what a study session really looked like for them. And I got lots of really good detailed information around things that I wasn't really surprised that they weren't doing yet, but hoped that they would be willing to change. And so the first journal entry was really getting them to think about, were they really willing to change in order to see some of the outcomes that they wanted. And then the next session, based on what they told me in their reflection, we were able to do a study session that I called What a Study Session Should Really Look and Feel Like. And so we actually did one together so that they had a sense of what that should feel like on the college level. To give you a sense of whether this process of self-knowledge and reflection and action planning really could make a difference, I put this slide in from a previous pilot where we did not use ELLI, and you can see that students that were in the reading course are in the gray bars, and this is comparing them to students who were in a psychology course but not also in the reading course. And you can see that students in the reading course did progressively worse each time they took an exam, and so that was starting to feel like we were repeating that a little bit in the second graph, where you could see their scores and the gap was widening between students that were in the reading course and the science course and those who were just in the science course. But you can see by exam 3, 4, and 5, the students started to narrow the gap in performance between what they were doing on the exams and what students that were just in the general population were doing. And so I felt really happy about that and felt that that was a good, strong sign that their action planning and reflection was actually leading to changes in behavior that were helping them to be more successful. I'd like to also point out that students who are in the college reading course had lower SAT scores than those from the general population. And so it was never an expectation that they would do better than the general population, but we wanted to see them at least maintain and perhaps, as we were happy to see them starting to close the gap in performance. So we were happy with those results. The next example I wanted to share was in the learning dimension of creativity. So again, in week 1, we really focused on the students as individuals and looked at creativity just in general and at a personal level. So we looked at the My Profile description of creativity, and then I had a few guest speakers come in, an art professor and an English professor who specializes in poetry. And we had a discussion about creativity as a gift, as a skill, or as a discipline. And so it was really a great conversation with the students that even these professionals who work exclusively in the creative arts consider creativity not to be a gift that you're either given or born with or not, but more of something that's a discipline that they have to work at and that they take risks in every day. And so they kind of highlighted those aspects of creativity. And I think it was a bit of an eye-opener for students. It was really a very well-received activity. Then in week 2 of the cycle, connecting it to academics, I wanted them to have some tools and strategies that they could use when they would do their action planning and go into the week of trying to make some positive changes in their lives. And so I found a tool called Scamper, which is a framework that helps students to be more creative. And we used that in the context of how they might improve a class presentation. So students had a presentation to do, and they designed the presentation and got ready to do it, but then we used the Scamper framework and had them go back and choose one of the aspects of Scamper to go in and modify the presentation to improve it, to feel as if they had made some creative changes. And so again, I felt it reinforced the speaker's notion that creativity is not just this internal gift you have, but it's a practice. It's something you do and that you can get better at. So in this third example, we took critical curiosity, and in week 1 we looked at them personally, and I and while this may be a more academic example, it was still something that they were struggling with personally. A lot of them don't like to speak up in class. They don't like to raise their hand. They don't like to do class presentations. And so I found a strategy for curiosity called the what, why ladder, where you start with the what question, and then you follow that up with a series of why questions. And so, again, I think it also reinforces the fact that I tried to use things that they were really struggling with, that were either coming up within the class or I knew were happening for them in their personal lives. So we started with the discussion. What makes it so hard to speak in front of others? We brainstormed that, and then we kept following each response up with a why. Well, why does that make it hard? Why does that make it hard? And then we had a visitor on our campus, Dr. Leslie Felbane from the University of Maryland, who specializes in performance at her university. And she had come and given us some strategies for teaching as performance. And I thought these could really be useful for our students. So this notion of just breathing and making eye contact with your entire room, with this notion of throwing a net out over your whole group that you're speaking to, and then putting those three things together to give you confidence and a sense of ownership and physical presence in the room. And it was really helpful for us, and the students really enjoyed doing it. So that was our first activity. So in the second week of the cycle on critical curiosity, I introduced an article called The Hungry Mind, Intellectual Curiosity as the Third Pillar of Academic Performance. And I had them think about what are the structures that support us in academic success. So, and I had them draw a picture of a house. So if a roof is academic success, what would be the things that were supporting that roof? And then we used the article and the abstract and some more reading skills to drill down into the role of curiosity in success. And so it's a very interesting article where it talks about critical curiosity, effort, and intelligence as the three pillars. And so for our students who sometimes feel like they may be behind other students in terms of their SAT scores and other indicators of academic performance, that really they have a lot of control in terms of their own effort and their own willingness to be curious and to put that curiosity to work towards their own success. So that was a really interesting article, and the first part of two activities we did in that second week. The second activity we did was to use another inventory about curiosity called the CEI2, and you can see the reference at the bottom of the slide there, but it gets students to kind of measure themselves in terms of two parts of critical curiosity: stretching, or the I wonder piece, and the embracing piece, I'm willing to try. So it gets them again to have a little bit more self-knowledge, how comfortable they are stretching into new areas, how comfortable are they with the risks that always go along with trying something new. And this then kind of flowed into the reflection that was tying it all together with the what, why ladder, where they feel they are with their ELLI scores and critical curiosity, what the CEI2 could tell them, and how does that play into their interest in college, their interest in their general education curriculum, and just their general interest and engagement in life. So I had them then start their reflection on kind of a review of what curiosity is and how it can impact a person's life, and their own levels of curiosity and how they see that impacting their own engagement levels in school, along with their kind of formal action planning, what they were going to actually plan to do in the following week to practice being more curious, how they could use the what, why ladder or some other things we talked about in order to have to build that piece up within themselves. So that's a good segue into the general action planning cycle that I tried to do with them for every one of the learning dimensions. So they would have to identify their goals for each one of the learning dimensions. How would they like to see that in a concrete way change within their lives? And what strategies would they use to help bring about the change? And what would success look like if they were demonstrating more critical curiosity or creativity? And how are they going to measure that change? And could they identify students in class or others who could help them stay on track? And they would put that into their reflections, and then there would be an ongoing conversation with me and with each other in class. So this was another great resource from Vital Partnerships on how to have the coaching conversation. And I think, it really was important to have this ongoing relationship that was based on trust and support, but also challenge where needed. And that you could focus your coaching questions around student goals or their plans, their success criteria, or were they giving up? How resilient were they? Where were they in terms of self-awareness? Were they seeing in each other? Perhaps they were making more progress than they were giving themselves credit for. Or there were areas where they could challenge themselves more. And what outcomes was I seeing? Well, I was seeing them change and grow over time and pointing those things out, but also keeping the momentum going, the cycle of planning and action planning and change going on. But also, I think it's important for students to have some choice in the things that they're looking to change. So in the model that I used, I had the luxury of a 15-week semester, so we could look at all of them, but you may not have that same luxury. So I think they really emphasize letting students choose those areas where they want to work on things or make some improvements. And I agree. I think that's really important. And I think it's also important to notice to what extent you're building that common language that you're trying to build with your students around lifelong learning, and that really did happen for us. But I think it takes noticing on the part of the facilitator to bring that out, to reinforce it, to model it, so that students can start to use that same discourse around the things that you want to focus on. And I would also say, this is just one way. This is just what made sense to me. But I really, really enjoyed doing the planning of each one of the lessons and asking the question, if I were trying to help students get stronger at this learning dimension, how could I go about creating experiences that would help them to see the change, to imagine the change, to embrace the change, and to actually go out and make it happen for themselves. So as an instructional designer, I think that's just kind of what we do on a daily basis. But it was just very rewarding to be able to try to think of those activities. So I would say, I'm sure there are an infinite number of ways in which you could do this with your students or in your context. And this is just one way that I thought to do it. And finally, if you'd like to see how we integrated the other learning dimensions, you can visit my course blog at that web address. I tried to keep detailed notes of what I did each week with students. And of course, this project involved more than just ELLI, so you might have to sift through some of the postings. But I'm pretty sure I included each one of the dimensions and how I went about getting students to work on that area. So again, there's no one way to do it. This was just my way. So I hope it was informative and useful, and please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have questions or would like to ask me any other things about how the project went for us. And of course, I'd like to thank Vital Partnerships for all their support in this process, along with my partners, Barb Eschbach, the head librarian at Penn State York, and Dr. Jorge Santiago Blay, who is the instructor of the biology course and my partner in the research project.